Welcome to High Performance Principle number 5. Don't let emotions drive the bus. Don't let your emotions be the thing that's behind the steering wheel of your business, your career, your happiness, or your life. And if you are looking for the training on the flipped lid, this is that training. So you're in the right place for that here. So let's jump into High Performance Principle number 5. Don't let your emotions drive the bus. Now, this is super important, this principle, because you'll find that when most people are making bad choices and bad decisions in their life, whether it's a strategic business thing, whether it's jumping into an opportunity too soon without doing due diligence, or anything in how they act or how they behave, a lot of the problems that people create for themselves is they're making those decisions based on emotions. Their emotion is the thing that's making them do that action or make that decision. So it's pretty obvious, but if someone's really fearful or really stressed, they're usually making fairly bad choices in that time. If someone's really sad, someone's really negative, it's really easy to make a bad choice, right? An obvious example is if you're trying to be super healthy and you have a certain diet plan, but then all of a sudden you're having a down day, you're stressed, you're overworked, you're frustrated. That's usually because of that emotion being present. Because of that emotion, you end up eating the wrong food or drinking too much of the wrong alcohols, and then you're obviously sabotaging your goals. But that really came down to the bad choice, the bad behavior came from emotion. Happens in the business world, and it happens all the time with a lot of people. They're making their bad choices because it's emotion that's driving them forward and choosing if they go left, right, or straight. So it's a massive, massive issue. Even when it comes to the positive emotions, you can be making choices based on positive emotions, which can also be a challenge. If we look at something like the share market, a lot of people will get really, really excited about a company or a day trade or some sort of swing trade or something. And because they're so excited, they can jump in prematurely without doing their due diligence or anything else. So even positive emotions, we don't want them behind the steering wheel, okay? So if you are a person where commonly you find that your emotions are steering your life and your actions and your thoughts and your behaviors are based on emotion, you will be someone who's probably going to have a roller coaster life, up and down. And when you're feeling good, you'll be flowing and performing well, but then when you're feeling trashy, then you'll be performing really, really badly as well. But you won't have that steady consistency in your business, in your life, in your career, in your performance, because it's really based on emotions, right? So that's a real challenge, and that's what we want to kick off. We want to kick the emotions out of the driver's seat, still keep them on the bus. We want to kick the emotions out of the driving seat, and we want to have other things in the driver's seat. So if it's not emotions behind the steering wheel, you ask, then what is it? Well, instead of having emotions steering the bus, what we want things like your values steering the bus. We want your choices based on your values, based on wisdom, or the wise and smart thing to do, or your goals, or the strategy. You want strategic thinking and strategy to be the things making the decisions on actions and also reactions towards things. So we're going to dive deep into this, and we're going to talk about something really, really powerful. Stay to the end of this training, because even if you don't think that you make decisions based on emotion, you'll probably be surprised by the time we get to the end of this training. If you're someone who feels like you burn out a lot and get fatigued a lot, then hang around, because this training is also going to unpack some really important stuff for you to know. So before we jump into that level of stuff, that level of training, I do want to say that emotions are not bad. You just don't want the emotions driving the bus, okay? So we don't want you to be a numb robot. We want you to have emotions, and having a healthy understanding and processing of emotions and being able to get into a good emotional state. But ultimately, we just don't want the emotions being the first line of decision making. So even if I'm getting myself into a really empowered, confident state, because I want to I perform better when I'm confident, it's not that an emotion made the choice to get into a confident state, it's strategy, it's wisdom, it's the right thing to do. So there's something else driving the bus, and that's where we want you all to be. That's where we want you to be, where emotions get into the bus on a different seat, but these other things, wisdom, goals, strategy, values, they're the things driving all the decisions, all the reactions, all the stuff that we're doing in our life. Okay, so here you have a really, really beautiful diagram. It is the human brain. What a beautiful organ the brain is. So I'm not going to go super deep dive. I'm going to go very big picture because that's all we're going to need to know in order to use this info to perform at the highest possible level, be super happy, super fulfilled, and also crush our goals and really power forward. So here, when we look at this picture of the brain, there are basically on a big picture, there are three parts of the brain. We have the cerebral cortex, we have the limbic system, or if you get nerdy on it, it's the paleo-mammalian cortex. So the limbic system, that's where the emotions and all that stuff are. And then we also have the brainstem, which is the real deep part of the brain that connects the brain down the spinal cord and puts nerves into every part of the body. So we have the cerebral cortex, that's like the upper part of the brain, right? Logic and creative thinking and strategic thinking, analysis, all that stuff is in the cerebral cortex. Then we have the limbic system, a lot of emotions, a lot of parts of the brain that deal with those kind of things, and then the brainstem, the deep part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe it this way. If this is the brain, right, you see my hand here, so make sure you're looking at the screen right now. As you're looking at the screen, you'll see this fist here, right? This is like a hand model of the brain. So if this here is the cerebral cortex, it kind of looks like a brain, cerebral cortex, hoping yours is bigger than this. So the outside of the brain here, that'd be the cerebral cortex. But if you open up the cerebral cortex and underneath it, you'd have all these other parts of the brain here, the deeper parts, and they're like the limbic system, the brainstem, the emotion, and the deep hardwiring of the brain is underneath it there. So we're going to refer to this hand model of the brain, the lid, and then the stuff underneath the lid. Okay, now, just to really drive this point home, if we look at the lid part of the brain, so the top part, the cerebral cortex, this is the part of the brain that does your logical thinking. It's rational. It makes decisions for you, good decisions. It's what gives you attention. It's the part of the brain that does focus, awareness, language, so being able to communicate and speak, problem solving, and we need that in business all the time and in our careers, because where there's people and where there's opportunity and all these things, most of success is solving a problem of some sort. Most of our accomplishment of goals is solving some problem in ourselves or overcoming a situation. And then we also have high level cognition. So this is the part of the brain when you're thinking of your best ideas, when you're in the shower and you have these amazing genius moments, when you're laying in bed and your brain's finally relaxing and your brain starts giving you these amazing ideas, that's coming from this lid part of your brain. Okay, so this is super important because all of these things, logical thinking, rationale, decision-making, attention and focus, awareness, language, problem-solving, and high-level cognition, we need these to accomplish our goals and to be high performers. There's just no negotiation. So we need to know where they live, because I'm going to tell you how to switch these things on purpose and show you why these things switch off, okay? So if we lift the lid underneath the brain, so remember, hand model of the brain, I've got my finger in the middle there, so that's the limbic system and the brainstem. So we're just going to call that the deeper parts of the brain. There's heaps of sections of the brain. Again, I need to teach you as much as going to be practical for you to use it and become high performers. So in the deeper parts of the brain, under here, the limbic system, the brainstem, right? These are the things that do emotion, your habits, the things that you do without thinking about doing them, whether it's a physical habit of biting your nails or a physical habit of action or a physical habit of thinking. So that's all under here. Also, motivation. And technically, if I'm being really honest, not all motivation comes from here. Motivation can come from the lid as well, but you need to really be trained up using, obviously, my training and stuff like that to allow motivation to come from the lid instead of underneath here, because a lot of people's motivation comes from emotion. We kind of want to shift that, and we have a hack and a whole training on carrot versus stick. So motivation, your long-term memory is underneath here, and your central nervous system. So all the stuff that goes through the entire body, all the nerves going through the entire body. And this is the big one, guys. Ready? Your fight, flight, freeze, or faint response is coming from underneath the deeper parts of the brain. You would have heard of fight or flight before, but for those who haven't heard of the freeze and faint part, it's all the same thing. When you're in fight or flight, it's actually now called fight, flight, freeze, faint, because you can fight, so there's a stressor, you can attack back, you can flight, so you can run away from the problem, you can freeze up and just be like deer in the headlights, or you can actually just pass out and just faint. So they're the different ones. So a lot of people think, well, in the business world, in the corporate world, in sport, in performance, there is no real fight or flight because I'm not being mugged, I'm not being attacked, there's no lion or whatever. But it doesn't take a lot, and it doesn't have to be the biggest levels of stress that triggers fight or flight. It's actually the fight, flight, freeze, faint response can happen in smaller ways. So let me show you how that particular stuff happens in the business or the corporate world, right? Or in this, we'll stick with those two. In the business or the corporate world. Fight is where you get angry at the situation, angry at people, angry at your client, angry at the staff, angry at the whatever, and then you try and fight back. It's you versus them, two egos clash, people get angry and they try and fight the situation. Flight is like avoiding problems, running away from the problem, pretending the problem isn't there, avoiding the problem, pretending it's not there, and that's a stress response, and you're trying to avoid the problem, avoid the challenge, avoid the situation. That's called shrinking back, right? Then you have the freeze, where the problem has happened, it's stressing you out, and then you just start freezing. So you might have a business strategy, a strategic plan, but you can't execute it because you just keep freezing. You know what to do, but then when it's time to do it, you get stressed and you just freeze and you go deer in the headlight and you can't think properly, or you start to freeze and you just can't take action. And then you have to kind of then either flight, calm down, beat yourself up, and then you try to do it again and you freeze again. You're freezing when you need to be taking action. Happens in sport all the time. The player's open, they pass to him, he's stressed on the court, he catches the basketball, and then he's freezing and he's not making a pass, he's not dribbling, he's not shooting, he's not adding to the game because he's freezing in those particular moments. And then he'll probably flight, which means he'll just pass the ball away or freak out and lose the ball or something like that, right? And the faint response is when you see in movies all the time where someone stresses out and then they just pass out completely so they can actually faint. So this is really important because look at the screen right now because of this. This is the model of the brain. To be high performers, we need to be using the lid part of the brain, don't we? Because we just said we don't want emotions driving the bus. We don't even want our motivation coming from emotion, and we want to have control over these things, right? So what will happen when people get stressed, when people get challenged, when the fight, flight, freeze stuff begins to happen? Guess what happens? They flip their lid. So if you're watching right now, watch the screen. They flip their lid. What was the lid? The lid was the logical thinking, the rationale, the decision making, the attention, the awareness. The stress comes, the challenge comes, the issue comes. They flip their lid, and what happens? All of a sudden, they're being driven by emotion. They're being driven by the fight, flight, freeze response, and they can't think properly, right? So all of a sudden, you're at work, and some big problem comes your way, right? And it triggers you, it stresses you out, it makes you fearful or annoyed or frustrated or angry, and you flip your lid. An extreme version of flipping your lid is that person in the workplace who just gets so angry and just blows up at people or blows up at things. They completely flip their lid and they're fully emotional, totally irrational, fully angry, all those types of things, right? Or someone who, when there's a challenge or you confront them or you're trying to coach them and they get really stressed out and they get really overwhelmed, they flip their lid and they just start to panic. That's flipping the lid. Now, when someone has flipped their lid, you will have noticed this, right? Because they've flipped their lid, they're not actually thinking from that cerebral cortex part of their brain. It's all emotional and there's no rationale. They're not thinking logically. right? They're not thinking logically. They're thinking worst case scenarios, or they're mind reading. This person thinks this about me. They can't think logically because their lid is flipped. And if you talk to them using logic or rationale, often it's hard for them to really get it and for them to feel good about it, because they can't process that rationale and logic because their lid has been flipped, right? So also they can't make decisions really well because they're angry, stressed, fearful. They're just in an emotional state. They've flipped their lid. All of a sudden they can't make good decisions because their mind is erratic, and decision making, especially good decision making, comes from the part of the brain that has been flipped, and they can't actually use it in that moment, right? So you can't focus. You're stressed, you're overwhelmed, you're frustrated, you're angry. All of a sudden, because you're flipped, you can't have your attention or your focus on certain tasks. You procrastinate, you get all over the shop, even things like your language. Now, when you flip your lid, you'll notice that if you're doing public speaking, and you're stressed, right? When you walk on stage, if you start freaking out, start getting nervous, and you can't control the fight, flight, freeze, you can't bring the lid back down, and you talk from a flipped lid, you can't remember what to say. Language is in the lid. Language is in the lid. So you're trying to do a presentation, you're trying to do a keynote, you're trying to do a webinar, you're trying to do some sort of training, but because eyes are on you and you flipped your lid, it's really hard for you to find the words and to communicate like you usually would. You talk to a friend, you talk to a family member, you talk to your team who you're really comfortable with, the lid stays on and you know what to say, right? So most people can't find the words. So the solution is actually learning how to bring that lid down, and then the words come to them. Bring the lid down, the right things to say show up, because the right things to say live in the lid, okay? Even with problem solving, just like on the inside out approach principle, I said that most people will try and just take action and try to fix the problem and then feel better. This is a part of it. We need you to first bring the lid down so you can feel better, and then you'll be able to problem solve better and solve the external problem from there. And again, high level cognition, high level thinking, high level business strategy, high level leadership, high level project management, high level sports and athletic performance, high level happiness requires the lid to be down. So if you are living flipped, all of a sudden you're making decisions based on emotion, and that's steering the bus. That's not a good place to be, because you're missing the cerebral cortex part of the brain. So straight away, I'm sure you're recognizing when people are flipping their lids, and you're realizing all these patterns here that are coming purely because people have their lid up and they're not bringing it down. Okay, so just to drive the point home further, here are some symptoms of a flipped lid, okay? Creating drama, because it's emotion, right? It's emotion. Creating drama is a symptom of a flipped lid. Feeling out of control. If you hear people in your team or people you work with, clients, whatever it may be, they feel out of control, it's because their lid is flipped and they don't have that strategic decision making. They don't have that high level cognition part of their brain, their problem solving part of their brain, and they're running on emotion. And when people run on emotion, they're a roller coaster. Even, as I said, even if it's full on excitement, it's still a yo-yo and it's still a frenzy. It's not steady, it's not consistent, right? So again, flipped lid, feeling out of control. When your lid is flipped, you will live very reactively and not proactively. Okay? Living reactive is a major problem, because just by having your lid flipped, you will get more distracted than usual. So if you're having a day and your lid is flipped and you haven't brought the lid down yet, then what's going to happen is you'll be working away and a team member will come into your office or they'll ask a question, and you'll find it easy to be distracted because the lid's not down. And then because of that, you're just going to get distracted more and more and more. You might even be working from home by yourself and have some free space to work on a project, push something ahead. But because your lid's flipped, you'll find that you're scrolling on Facebook or Instagram, or you're just walking up and getting your 5th coffee for the day, or you're snacking. You're just getting distracted easily, because when the lid is up, distraction is going to be one of the symptoms of that. And yeah, also as well, you won't be doing proactive tasks usually. Your mind will be reacting to whatever emotion is leading you to react to. So most of the time, you're going to be successful, not because of how well you react to things that are incoming, but because you do things that are strategic and proactive. You're doing everything because you're driving long-term or over a few months in a certain direction. And that's what's going to get you there. Okay, obvious, but symptom of a flipped lid: you're overwhelmed, you're stressed, you're worried. Thinking the worst. In your mind, you're imagining worst case scenarios, but it's not just thinking the worst, it's thinking the worst without the high level cognition. So you're catastrophizing, as we call it. All these catastrophes and worst case scenarios, and your emotions are in it. It's not a contingency plan. Contingency planning is when the high level cognition is down, the lid of your brain is down, and you can actually say, okay, if this bad thing happens, here is the contingency plan. Okay, cool. So if this issue prolongs, here is a way that we can pivot and move forward. But when you have contingency plans with your lid down, it doesn't feel overwhelming. It might still be negative, but it's not the same thinking the worst where you begin to go, I think it's Stuart Little or something like, no, that's the mouse or something. I don't know cartoons, but there's one that's like, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. That's kind of an example of thinking the worst. It's really emotional, it's really irrational, and there's no real strategic contingency plan in place. It's all emotion, it's all the deeper part of the brain. Fight, flight, freeze, and faint is another symptom. So if you're freezing, if you're arguing with people all the time and blowing up at them, that's again a flipped lid situation. If they're freezing or if they're avoiding problems, the stress is making you flip, and then it's making you avoid the hard conversation, avoid the task, whatever it may be. If you feel fatigued, it's because, again, you're flipped, right? As long as you're getting enough sleep and you're getting enough water and you're getting enough of the right foods and but your body can perform with a fair bit of junk going through your system. But fatigue, most of the time with high performers, fatigue is usually because they're living flipped, or as I'm going to explain in a moment, they're living half flipped. Okay, that's usually where fatigue and burnout is coming from. If you're feeling fatigued and you think it's because you're working too much, look around you and see, is there anyone else who's doing the same workload, the same hours as me, and they're having more energy than me? Okay, if there is, it's probably a symptom of actually living flipped, and we're going to teach you how to bring the lid down more. And then the last one is this obvious emotional outbursts. So it's one thing to have like frustration or anger on the inside, but when it outbursts and you verbalize it, or it really just it becomes an outburst of emotion, then you're obviously flipped. There can be things that will trigger you to get angry, frustrated, sad, negative, but we want to have that flip and then bring the lid down, process it, and then be able to handle it instead of just having an outburst. And this is why in my opinion, and I've been doing this for 12 years, and you know what I mean? So take my opinion however you want, but in my opinion, any therapy that says deal with anger by just getting it out and screaming into a pillow, you are wasting your time. You are allowing and training yourself to flip your lid faster. Emotional outbursts do not fix things like build-up of anger, in my experience and in my, what I would say, expert opinion. But if you want to scream into pillows, then test it for a while and see how it goes. I think you're just going to train yourself to have a flipped lid and not learn how to bring the lid down and process these things properly. Okay, so a lot of content so far. I know you guys are loving it. This is a real game changer and real dynamite, especially I am going to teach you, and throughout this whole program, we give you stuff about how to bring the lid down. And we have expert trainings on them all, but you need to understand the flipped lid concept. Don't flip your lid. We want to bring the lid down. Now, you, being a high performer, being someone who wants to be a high performer, you are more than likely going to have a fair bit of control over how much you flip, right? So there'll be times where you really get tempted to flip your lid and have an emotional outburst at someone, but most of the time, you've probably learned how to not flip that much of the way. So with high performers, this is a real important point, so listen up. Most high performers, male, female, doesn't matter, most high performers don't fully flip, they half flip. They half flip. They live half flipped. They're not fully fight, they're not fully flight, they're not fully emotional outbursts, they're not fully freeze, but they're half flipped. So that half flipped state is also super dangerous, right? Because what happens being half flipped, it's like you're hanging on a cliff. And at any moment, if you flip too much, you know you're going to fall, right? But being half flipped is really exhausting, because when you flip your lid, whether it's stress, anger, frustration, negativity, no matter the undercurrent emotion behind flipping the lid there, it's going to release cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone in your body. Okay, you have adrenal glands and they pump out cortisol or adrenaline, right? And those adrenal glands sit right above your kidneys on your lower back, right? So when you flip your lid fully, or even if you just flip your lid just halfway, right? And you're living half flipped, that's enough to release some cortisol. So most high performers are living half flipped. They're stressed, but they're just trying to take action or just trying to solve the problems. And they're thinking, I'll be happy when, I'll relax and lower my lid when all these things happen. And they're living so external, being locked into the external, that they're not bringing the lid down, and they're just training and used to living half flipped. So that means they're not fully, they haven't fully lost their logical thinking, but they're not really at high level cognition. They just can't think straight all the time. Problem solving happens, but it's not fast. They can remember what to say, but then, some things in terms of their attention or focus is a bit off. Now, most high performers, they do this. And I know because this was me for many years. In fact, I had 2 bouts of actual adrenal fatigue and burnout by the age of about 22. The second lot of burnout was just living half flipped. It was just living half flipped. I was just half flipped all day long. So when I was in that, working with people, going through my day, because I was living half flipped, I was constantly releasing some of that adrenaline and that cortisol. And guess what? Because I was still living external at the time, locked into the external, guess how I was bringing the lid down? Video games for hours on end, right? I'd have to cancel my business day and just do it again tomorrow. I would cancel appointments. I would cancel all sorts of stuff because I just needed to relax. I would drink coffee to lower the lid. Now, coffee releases cortisol, but my brain would go to a coffee shop and run away from the challenges and the stress and the go. And there was many reasons of the tactics I was doing, the way I was thinking, all that kind of stuff that was leading to this. But either way, I was living half flipped, and I would need to go to a coffee shop and I would order a meal, or I'd just drink coffee and sit there for an hour. And then by sitting there for an hour, ignoring all the challenges, pretending they weren't there, my lid would start to go down. And then I would go back to my day, half flip, and then continue on. But my brain then would start to get addicted to coffee, because it wasn't the coffee juice. It wasn't the coffee beans that were lowering the lid. It was the associations to getting away from it all and having a coffee. But either way, that was an external way I was bringing the lid down. I see a lot of clients of mine, when they first start working together, they'll use wine, they'll use alcohol to lower their lid. Or they'll use binge watching Netflix or TV, and that's their only way they know to lower the lid. Some clients, they'll spend money, and they'll just spend a whole bunch of money just to lower the lid. And it's not even about what they buy and receive, it's just the emotional positivity of buying something. So these are all ways that are ways, and they're not all bad, but if it's your only way to lower the lid, then it is bad. Because then you'll be addicted or reliant on those external things just to lower the lid. So if you're saying to yourself, I just need to get away from it all, then yes, there are probably some big challenges you need to fix, right? But the biggest one at the moment, starting from an inside out approach, is you need to learn to lower the lid. You need to learn to lower the lid in an internally driven way, because at the moment you've got emotion with one hand on the steering wheel, but then you also have logic on the other hand of the steering wheel, and they're going to be a bit of a tug of war, and it's just not pretty, okay? So as I said, fatigue is usually coming because you're living half flipped, which means fight, flight, freeze, faint is a normal part of your workday, whether you realize it or not. The good news is when you learn to lower the lid, what's going to happen is your energy will increase, your performance will increase, you'll be able to work more hours with more energy, and you'll have more patience with your family. You won't be snappy with your family, you'll enjoy them more, you'll be able to be in the moment more. And when I say be in the moment, you'll be able to be focusing on them when they're in front of you, being present with them. Why? Because again, attention and focus, being present, is lid, not emotion underneath there. Man, this is powerful stuff. I'm sure that you're getting it. Okay, so now we have to really talk about how on earth do we bring the lid down? How do we bring the lid down? There are many ways to bring the lid down. As I said, you can use the external things. Some people, and it is healthy to do this, some people will bring the lid down by holidays. Brilliant, right? But again, it's not always practical. Especially, with business, how it can be in the busy seasons of life. You can't always be like, cool, I'm going away to Bali for 10 days. You can't always take a 3-day weekend. Sometimes you try and have a day to yourself, and if you've got kids, then they might, demand attention. It's not as relaxing. You might want to go for a bike ride like I do. Then you get on the road, and it's so windy, it's not really enjoyable. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of things it can be. So what I want to talk about is how can we bring the lid down in the moment. Now, a lot of these things I'll say, but there's actually full trainings in other parts of the program, okay? So I'll talk about them, and if you want the full training on that key to bring the lid down, just jump to that other training. So, first way, in the moment, to bring the lid down, okay? The lid's been flipped, and it's the 4x4 breathing pattern that the military train their soldiers on. So, let me give you this example, right? Imagine you're at war. You got your gun, you're looking dressed like one of these fellas here. You're in like a country and there's a war on. Now, if you're doing your patrols, you're going through the motions, at any moment, right? At any moment, you can start getting shot at, bombs can go off, whatever. As soon as these soldiers start getting shot at, what's happening with their lid? Their natural reaction, which is totally normal, they're going to flip their lid. They're going to flip their lid. Now, if they keep their lid flipped as they're getting shot at, what are they going to do? Emotional reactions. They're going to fight by just shooting, but they're going to probably shoot without running to cover or without being strategic. So they just start fighting back. They'll flight and they'll try and run from the battlefield, leaving their team behind. They'll freeze, which means they won't know what decision to make, and they'll just kind of be panicking and they'll be frozen, which could leave them to being an open target, or they could just faint and pass out. Which, could you imagine being in a team and then your mate has not been shot, he's just passed out. And then not only do you need to try and fight the enemy and stay safe, but you have to then try and collect this guy who's passed out and bring him over, putting your life or your team's life at risk. So, what would you do? How would the Navy or the SAS, how would these high-level soldiers get taught on how to bring the lid down when they're being shot at with guns? And they have a lot of psychological training, and they only take on people who can really handle this, and it's still full-on impactful for their mind. But this is the technique. The quote I heard from a soldier, he said, on the battlefield, there's a lot that you can't control, but no matter what situation you're in, you can always control your breathing. So what they get trained to do is, as they're getting shot at or as they're running for cover, right, the lid has been flipped, they start to breathe in for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds. Breathe in and breathe out, and their lid starts to go down. Now, before you think this is stupid, they don't stand still, close their eyes and do in for 4 and out for 4. They've learned to control their breathing, even though stress response and adrenaline wants to make their breathing short, sharp. What they do is they override the flipped lid, and they override the stress, and they override the breathing by consciously breathing in and breathing out and slowing and controlling their breath. So they've learned to control their breath while they do and think of other things. Bombs start going off, first response, deep breathing in, deep breathing out, at the same time as they then run for cover. And their lid might be flipped, and they might start to, what they say, flap, if you're looking at some of the British, the way that they say it. But they start to freak out, lid's flipped, they begin to deep breathe in for 4, out for 4, and the lid starts to come down. And then they can get more and more logical thinking. Their training kicks in, and the science says that if you do the 4 in, 4 out for 90 seconds, you will transition from sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, into parasympathetic nervous system. So it takes about 90 seconds for you to balance out that lid system there. So how this will look for you, right? How this will look for you is you flipped your lid. The first thing you want to do, you don't stop and close your eyes and ignore the world and then start breathing. You learn to 4 in and 4 out as you're handling the conversation, as you're thinking. If you have the space, yes, you can close your eyes, but it takes 90 seconds of that breathing pace, constantly breathing in for 4, constantly breathing out for 4. And what that's going to do is after 90 seconds, that lid is going to come down, and then you're going to have all those benefits of logical thinking, rational decision making, focus and attention awareness, your language, communication, problem solving, and high level cognition. Okay, so that's the 4x4 breathing. That's hack or tip key number 1. Number 2, you want to break your state. And again, we have a whole topic on breaking your state. Breaking your state is just a fancy way in NLP of saying how to, like, snapping out of it, and how to practically snap out of a bad mood or a bad state, or how to snap out of that fear response there. So you're in a state where your thoughts and your focus and your feelings are all flipped, or all in that negative zone. How do you actually shake that off and reset the lid back down? So there's a whole training on break state. So often when your lid's flipped, just realize you're not going to be performing at your peak. So if you're not doing the breathing, you might want to take a moment and just reset your state, shake it off, refocus, and then you want to do the next one, resetting your state, getting yourself into an empowered state. So sometimes it's the 4x4 breathing, sometimes it's just breaking out of the state, pattern interrupt, scramble the state, and then kind of shake it off. Sometimes then you can use resetting your state, stopping, tuning into confidence, tuning into a mindset of empowered, tuning into playful or positive, and being able to purposely get into the positive state, get into a laughy state where you're kind of feeling a bit laughy, even though the external is really challenging. Knowing that laughter actually increases immune system and creative thinking, and it just completely flushes the body full of fear and cortisol and all that type of stuff. But being able to reset your state, massive on that as well. Again, if you're working flipped, you're not going to be working very efficiently. It might seem a waste of time to take 2 to 5 minutes to break your state, reset your state, even 90 seconds to do your breathing when there's so much work to do, so much hectic stuff that needs to get done. But remember, as soon as you can bring the lid down, you'll be blasting through tasks faster. Your abilities will be heightened, your skill will be heightened, your performance will be heightened. So the 2 to 5 minutes or the 90 seconds, whatever it takes to get the lid down, is actually well worth the time investment. And then sometimes it's just as simple as stopping and thinking, right? You flip the lid, don't let emotion drive the bus, take a step back, stop, let the lid calm down by just kind of giving yourself some space and just begin to think logically. When you start to pull on or focus on that logical part, as you're putting a demand on the logical, rational part of your mind, you will actually pull that down. Because your brain has a goal or an outcome, and you begin to pull on the logic, and you're starting to try and think logically, then that can also be enough to bring the lid down. Some people haven't gone through this training with me, and you'll see them in the workplace, you'll see them on the sporting field, and you'll see how they deal with challenges. Is an issue happens, they just stop, they just purposely take a moment, they don't try and react straight away, they give themselves some space, and then they just begin to think. And then that there, even though they might flip, they bring the lid down by stopping and thinking. Okay, so there's some of the options. There is one massive thing we do need to address. We got to fix the root issue. So fix the root issue. So if this is something that you commonly go through, if you're commonly flipping your lid, or you're living every single day half flipped, we really got to fix the root issue. And the root issue is this: you are living flipped. You are living half flipped. That is the issue. And it's not circumstances that flip your lid. As much as you blame financial challenges, business challenges, team and staff challenges, performance challenges, economy, You might blame all of those things. The real issue is your reaction to those things. There's a whole training. The problem's not the problem, but we got to fix the root issues here. So if you're living fully flipped or half flipped, you need to let me know, and we need to really focus on this in our one-to-one sessions so we can do the deep work. As you can see on the surface, it's one thing, but we got to look at those real drivers from the inside out approach mindset infographic, whether it's an identity thing, a belief thing, a thought thing, an emotion thing, a behavior thing. We got to find the root issue there of why you're living half flipped or fully flipped, and then we can really help you to perform and live with your lid down. So we got to fix the root issue, living flipped. Now, as we come to an end to this training, again, the big takeaway is you can see now how we don't want emotion to drive the bus. We don't want the flipped lid to be the thing behind the steering wheel. You don't want to be on that bus as well. If you're working or trying to perform and your leader is working or leading with a flipped lid, it's not an enjoyable experience. I get that. So hang in there, but that's tough. It's really tough, right? So we don't want those emotions to be driving the bus. When we're living, working, and performing with the lid down, and I don't care how much pressure you have in your life, it is possible to work and live with your lid down, right? There'll be moments of flipping, right? Even half flips, but 80 to 90% of the time, we can get you to perform with the lid down. Now, the more pressure you're under, the bigger game that you're playing, the more that there's riding on your performance, it's going to be easier to flip that lid, but we can still get you to live 90% of the time, 80% of the time with that lid down, but we just have to do more mindset work. You need to take your mindset game to such a high level. You need to get your mindset game to such a high level where you can perform with the lid down. Okay, but that is absolutely possible to do so. So we don't want emotions, that flipped mode to drive the bus. We want to get the lid down, and then your performance and your success is just going to go to another level. So, as always, we want to know your biggest takeaways for accountability's sake. So you're going to post again in the Slack or in the Facebook group, and we're going to keep accountable. I just watched Don't Let Emotions Drive the Bus. And my biggest takeaway was, what was your biggest takeaway? Out of everything we said, what's the biggest takeaway, the thing that you really need to remember? And on this one, if there's many takeaways, just put them all down on paper, put them all down into the Facebook group or into the Slack one-on-one. And so I've just watched Don't Let Emotion Drive the Bus. My biggest takeaway was this, and the action I'm going to take because of this is bang. And that's your accountability piece. And I really want to see what that's going to be. So that's the flipped lid training. That's the Don't Let Emotion Drive the Bus training. Do your accountability, and I look forward to seeing you on the next training.